Welcome back. The first presidential primary ballots, of course, won't be cast for months, but we've already got a pretty good idea of what candidates think most potential Republican voters want to hear. Culture war posturing. Check out this new ad from Republican presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy.
We're in the middle of a national identity crisis. Faith, patriotism, and hard work have disappeared. Wokeness, gender ideology, and the climate cult have taken their place. We spend so much time celebrating our diversity that we forget the values that bind us together. And I believe deep in my bones those values still exist.
The Republican base may be divided on America's role in the world and domestic priorities like entitlement spending, but at this moment, it sure looks like the culture war is the last unifying link inside the GOP. A quick programming note. We're going to have Vivek Ramaswamy here on the show on the set tomorrow. Joining me now is Tia Mitchell, Washington correspondent for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, former New York Democratic Congressman Joe Crowley, and American Enterprise Institute senior fellow Danielle Pletka. Since we're dealing with the right side of the aisle, Danny, I will give you the first shot at this, and that is the famous three legs of the stool that Ronald Reagan talked about. The Republicans had to sort of balance. Two legs are gone, right? Fiscal conservatism and sort of a unifying national security view. We don't have it right now. There's only one leg, and that's quite a balancing act that they have to do.
It is a balancing act, and that's why you're seeing a lot of disagreement, even among nominal 2024 candidates and actual 2024 candidates about things like Ukraine and defense spending. And so culture wars are the things that unite a lot of Republicans, because actually, when you look at not just the Republican base, but also a lot of suburban women and others, they're concerned about education. They're concerned about schools. They are concerned about these gender wars, about sports and who's playing against their kids. So those things are truly bread and butter issues for a lot of Americans in the way that, unfortunately, from my perspective, Ukraine is not.
Joe, you buy that? Have you've seen your share of the suburban-urban split? Do you think that the Democrats ought to be wary here of just assuming these culture issues won't play with the middle?
I think Dale's right that it does unite Republicans, at least certain sectors within the Republican Party, but it divides everyone else. Unfortunately, is the problem. And it just exacerbates, I think, what many believe is wrong in America these days. And it's tiring. It's exhausting at some point in time. You have the shooting yesterday, or the other day in Nashville, and again, what Republicans are focusing on is gender or transgender, as opposed to really what's killing our children are guns, and the all-ever access to them. Here, this woman had 7 guns legally purchased, and what we're focusing on.
But she was mentally not stable.
There's no question about that.
Should she have purchased them?
No.
Right.
Absolutely
and
not.
And that is
and
actually,
you and I agree on that, 100%. Right. But that's not being really, that's somewhat talked about, but it's, there's more to it than just a mental health issue.
Tia, it does feel as if the Republicans spend the entire time on this, in the same way when Democrats were talking about open borders, talking about defund the police, right? It put the worst version of the left in front of mainstream voters. How does the GOP avoid having the worst version of their right get put in front of mainstream voters?
Well, I think that's the risk if they don't shift the conversation in ways that are a little bit more practical. And, for example, on guns, when you poll even Republicans, there are gun control measures that have widespread support. Banning assault weapons has widespread support, even among the right. But it's how you frame the conversation. And if you frame it that Democrats want to take away all your guns because they hate the Constitution, then you're not going to be able to have, any type of conversation that could really result in anything good happening. And that's where Republicans run a risk, because they are framing it as a very us versus them combative politics on virtually every issue that does get people enraged. It might help you raise a lot of money, but it's terrible for governing, and it might not be great during a general election.
Danny, do you fear a moment on the right? Because look, I do think the Democratic Party is still paying a price for those early debates with the 20 candidates where they were all trying to out-progressive one another, right? Except for when Joe Biden was like standing alone on some of these questions and everybody was beating him up, and it turned out, oh, he might have been closer to where the Democrats were, everybody else. Why do I have a feeling we could see that on the debate stage with Republicans?
So, look, I think that to a large extent the Republican Party is still playing Donald Trump's game.
Yeah.
And that really is the risk. And of course, there is a vast group of other people who are delighted to see them playing Donald Trump's game. Not just Donald Trump, but the Democratic Party that backed all those MAGA candidates in the midterms, and the media, which enjoys very much this Donald Trump conversation because everybody loves to hate Donald Trump, me included. So, I think that's part of the problem for the GOP. And if they are not able to walk that tightrope, as I would say Governor Youngkin did very well, as Brian Kemp in Georgia has managed to do, if they can't figure that out, then guess what? 2024 is going to look like 2022 and 2020 and 2018.
And you can't out-Trump Trump.
Everybody,
that's the bottom line.
And the
attempt to do that, though, it only strengthens him. But I do think it opens up a lane for someone who's completely different from out-Trumping Trump and being less woke than anyone else.
It's why I think don't ignore people like Vivek Ramaswamy. I sit here and it's like, go ahead. I mean, I do think people are hungry they don't like the current crop of people. T, I want to pivot because Danny is guilting me a little bit, but I also think Joe and Danny together actually can tackle some Israel politics as it impacts domestic America a little bit. The White House, how nervous are they that they're going to lose leverage over Netanyahu on this?
I think the White House is trying to toe the line of sending a message that they don't want Israel to, run into decreasing its democracy, diminishing its democracy, and becoming more authoritarian. But I think the White House also has the risk of going too far and angering an ally, an old friend, and I think that's the line that Biden is trying to kind of toe, sending a strong message, but not, burning bridges with an ally.
Are you surprised, Danny, that the American right hasn't taken up Bibi's cause?
No, this is really an Israeli domestic issue. This is an outgrowth, not simply of the need for judicial reform in Israel, not to be too nerdy about this. There is a need for reform. The question is there a need to throw out the baby and the bathwater and, every single justice they have, or is there a need for, debate inside the country? But I think, honestly, this is an Israeli domestic issue. And as you see, when there are tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of Israelis lining the highway, as they have been, this is something that Israelis themselves are working through. I could see a Republican taking up the mantle for not interfering with the decision-making of Israel's sovereign government. After all, remember, Barack Obama sent his own campaign advisor to try to defeat Bibi in elections that were going on.
You mean after Netanyahu got involved in the Republican presidential process here?
And that whole game was really ugly. So
I think that was a mistake by Bibi. That has had long-term consequences for Israelis.
But the truth is that Bibi's problems right now have nothing to do with America. They are of his own making. Yeah.
A majority of Democrats sided with the Palestinians, had more sympathy for Palestinians than Israel for the first time in a Gallup poll. What do you make of that? That's be bad politics for any Democrat in New York City.
Well, I do think, the barrage of media and what's coming out of the Middle East right now, especially when it comes to Israel, is there's a lot of killing going on over there, and people, I think, are generally concerned about that. But I do think that Danielle's right in that I think this is an internal issue within Israel, but I do think that Netanyahu chose sides in American politics a number of years ago.
Well, and I think this is what's driven this Democratic number.
Despite his relationship,
you don't think it has? Why?
Despite his relationship with President Biden, which is different than it was with Obama.
Yeah.
I do think he chose his side a number of years
ago. Go ahead. Why do you think that?
Because the Democratic Party has been drifting away from support for Israel for many, many years, just, by the way, as the Republican Party has been drifting towards support for Israel.
No, it's true. When I first started in politics, it was the Republicans wanted nothing to do with Israel.
Exactly.
And it was the Pat Buchanan view was not an isolated view, right, Tia?
Right. And I also think it's I'm relatively new to national politics, but I would say it's steeped a lot in not wanting to be anti-Semitic, wanting those long-term ties, the Democratic Party, but also I think younger Americans in particular have heard about the plight of the Palestinian people and are, I guess, concerned about what they see, the violence, the human rights violations.
Right.
And again, the sensitivity of course, wanting to keep those ties to Israel aren't as strong, but also there's still the sensitivities of anti-Semitism as well.
Yeah, I think that there is a little bit of that generational divide.
But there's still a strong vein of pro-Israel politics within the elected Democratic Party.
No.
The elected.
The elected,
not the
no.
base.
I said elected Democratic.
Right, and that used to be how I used to say it, and the Republicans, the elected Republicans versus the rank and file. You guys are terrific. Thank you for pivoting with me on the panel. You're welcome, Danny.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.